right, so here we are again in 1 Samuel. We did not finish chapter 20. We got through verse 11, roughly, so to speak, and so that was the situation. Again, David has come back. He's escaped from Saul. Saul had been confounded by prophecy, and he was going to get David. David was with Samuel at the time. Remember, Saul had sent like 3 bands of messengers, and these guys all got confounded in prophecy. And then Saul went himself, probably with an entourage, his own gathering of men, and he was confounded before Samuel, and that allowed an opportunity for David to escape. So David does, and he goes down and he gets to Jonathan, and he goes to Jonathan asking, what's going on? How have I sinned against you all? What wrong have I done? Why does your dad want me dead? All that. And Jonathan doesn't believe it, because Saul's been keeping Jonathan in the dark, right? He's not letting him know anymore that he still wants David dead. And they decide that they're going to figure out a way to discern Saul's position with regard to David. And it's that empty seat test, right? That's what we talked about. The new moon feast is coming up. The new moon marked a new month for Israel. And at the beginning of each month, we talked about that process, some of the things that were required as far as the sacrifices go. You can go back in Numbers and read about those. I believe it was chapter 28. And you can see the various sacrifices that were required by the law. And that feast would take a couple days, possibly even 3, depending upon how it was observed. And so that's what they did, in addition to the daily sacrifices that they had to make. And there was a feast time, and David would be expected to be at the table of Saul. All right? He's one of Saul's commanders. It's right that he would be there. But David says, look, Jonathan, I want you to tell your dad, if he notices that I'm gone and says something, tell him, well, David asked me for permission to go back to Bethlehem, because at this time of the year, they offer a special sacrifice. They do a special sacrifice to the Lord in addition to that new moon festival. He's like, so he asked me to be able to go back to his parents, to his brothers, and then he said, look, you do that, and we'll see how your dad responds. If he's good with it, then you know what? I'm wrong. Saul don't want me dead. Everything's fine. But if he gets upset about it, then we know that he's after me. Okay? Jonathan says, all right. And David wants to know, how are we going to communicate? This is important, right? Again, they don't have technology. They don't have email. They can't text. Jonathan can't tell him, Dad is upset. He don't have any of that. They don't have a telephone. And you really got to be cautious with a tele-friend, because in a situation like this, the tele-friend may be loyal to Saul. And if he knows where David's at, he might rat him out. And so David's concerned about it, rightfully so. Who are we going to use to talk to me about all this? Because if your dad's upset, you don't need to come to me, and we got to be careful who we bring in on this. It doesn't say all that, but obviously that's got to be what's going on here. It's a big concern. So Jonathan says, let's go out to the field, right? And they do. And so that's where we're picking up. You can go ahead and roll to the next slide. So we're going to look at verse 12. And Jonathan said unto David, O Lord God of Israel, when I have sounded my father about tomorrow any time, or the 3rd day, and behold, if there be good toward David, and I then sin not unto thee, and I show it thee, the Lord do so, and much more to Jonathan. But if it please my father to do thee evil, then I will show it thee, and send thee away, that thou mayest go in peace. And the Lord be with thee, as he hath been with my father. And thou shalt not only, while yet I live, show me the kindness of the Lord, that I die not. But also thou shalt not cut off thy kindness from my house forever. No, not when the Lord hath cut off the enemies of David, every one from the face of the earth. So Jonathan made a covenant with the house of David, saying, Let the Lord even require it at the hand of David's enemies. That's important to notice. And Jonathan caused David to swear again because he loved him, for he loved him as he loved his own soul. And Jonathan said to David, Tomorrow is the new moon, and thou shalt be missed, because thy seat will be empty. And when thou hast stayed 3 days, then thou shalt go down quickly, and come to the place where thou didst hide thyself when the business was in hand, and shalt remain by the stone Ezel. And I will shoot 3 arrows on the side thereof, as though I shot at a mark. And behold, I will send a lad or a young man, saying, Go and out, or go find out the arrows. If I expressly say unto the boy or the lad, Behold, the arrows are on this side of thee, take them. Then come thou, for there is peace to thee, and no hurt, as the Lord liveth. But if I say thus unto the young man, Behold, the arrows are beyond thee, go thy way, for the Lord hath sent thee away. And as touching the matter which thou and I have spoken of, behold, the Lord be between thee and me forever. All right. So they go out in the field, and Jonathan has the arrows of communication, if you will. He says, you go out, you hide. You need to go and conceal yourself roughly where you were at when all this came about. Because remember, David went into hiding. But you need to be near and around this stone Ezel. This would have been a landmark. This would have been from what commentators can understand, from the scholars can gather from historical sources, this would have been probably a landmark that was well known. And so he says, I want you to be over there. And what happens on the 3rd day, I'm going to shoot. I'm just going to go out and shoot, all right? And I'll have a guy with me, and we'll speak in code. We're not going to tell the boy. We're not going to tell anybody about this. This is just me and you, David. And when I shoot them arrows, if I say, well, hey, they're on this side of thee, well, you know what? Then you just come on home. Nothing's wrong. But if I say, no, they're beyond you. They're further out. You're going to have to go get them. Well, then I'm telling you right there, you need to run. You need to get gone. And so Jonathan, when he makes this, I'm about to break this. When he makes this covenant with David, do you notice he points danger towards himself? Right? That's when, and you'll find that formula in covenant. He's saying, look, if I don't, then may the Lord do so to me. Right? The Lord do so to me if I don't hold up my end of this. Basically, God take me out if I don't do what I'm supposed to do. Now, what's fascinating is Jonathan's willing to accept that responsibility. He's willing to put himself in that position. He's willing to point danger towards himself. But when it comes to David's end of the deal, he says, may God require it of David's enemies. He doesn't ever say, may the Lord do so to thee if you don't do what you're supposed to do. He says, may he require it of your enemies. Jonathan is always putting David in a position of safety. You notice that? Jonathan is the one who goes and mediates between David and Saul. And says, no, Dad, you don't need to kill the guy. What? Why would you do this? He's not sinned against you. He's serving you well. Why? You don't need to do that and kill the innocent and get that innocent blood in your hands. And Saul relents that time, right? And then now, whenever he's whenever he's able to make this covenant, even here he's willing to accept danger, but not put David in a position of it. He wants to protect him. That would speak heaps to David about the guy that he's trusting, quite literally with his life. Now, the covenant he's making with him is an agreement between houses, right? He's saying, look, do not kill me. Don't cut me off, and don't cut off my house. Be kind. When God gets rid of all of your enemies, that Jonathan, I believe, understood David's the next guy. It's not Dad, it's not me, it's not our house. It's David. So whenever God takes care of all that, when he gets rid of your enemies and you're in this position of power, do not forget to have loving kindness towards me and towards my house. Because that would be the most immediate threat to their power. Right? I mean, we have in the argument of kings, right, and who ought to rule and sit on thrones and things of that nature. It's all about blood. It's all about inheritance. It's all about who was born where and all this other stuff, right? I mean, there's even that argument with England and whether so-and-so's the rightful king or queen or not, based on this or based on that. And so Jonathan would have that claim to the throne. His house would have that claim to the throne. And he's asking David a pretty big favor. Don't take us out. Now, David makes this covenant. David agrees to all of this, okay? And that's important to note because David's going to keep his end of the bargain, just like Jonathan's going to keep his end of the bargain. He's going to come and he's going to communicate honestly with David. And David is never going to forget Jonathan. He's going to continue to show kindness because after David is established as king, he goes and he searches out to see if there's anybody in Saul's house that he can show honor to, that he can express kindness towards. And there's Mephibosheth. I always told Shay that's what I wanted to name one of our kids, just for the fun of saying Mephibosheth. And Mephibosheth is a cripple boy because they were running. His nurse was running with him, trying to escape danger, fell, and he became paralyzed, as best I can understand. And he basically goes into hiding. A prince of Israel. And David finds him, and he has utmost humility before David. And he always sits at David's table. And David always takes care of Mephibosheth. And whenever David gets run out of Israel because of the coup that his boy leads, when he gets back into position of power, Mephibosheth is completely, it's like he's not taking care of himself. It's like he's been in mourning the entire time that David's been in exile. And he's welcomed into David's presence. So David doesn't fail his word either. These guys loved and cared for one another in a massive way. I mean, it says that Jonathan loves David as his own soul. They were genuinely there for one another, thick and thin. And they supported one another in one of the most difficult situations that I can imagine. Family loyalty, inheritance, kingship, money, power, respect. Some pretty big things are at stake. The establishment of your children as kings over entire nations for generations to come. That's massive. Me and my brother would get jealous over one piece of pizza. Who got it? It's a bit of an exaggeration. But these guys, they were able to work together because of their love for one another, because of their commitment to being faithful to God. Maybe there's questions or comments about that section. Yeah. Yeah. Jonathan is very much committed to David. And I think that part of that is not only Jonathan's commitment to David, but also his commitment to the Lord and doing what's right. He really wants to do the right thing. He's always pictured as that guy. His dad is not pictured as that way. So we'll pick up now. You can roll to the next slide. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, he's going to say some pretty harsh words to him. You can go to the next slide. So we'll pick up in 24, and we're going to read that. So with regard to that, Jody, specifically verse 30, whenever we get there. But verse 24 we'll pick up. It says, "So David hid himself in the field, and when the new moon was come, the king sat himself down to eat meat. And the king sat upon his seat as at other times, even upon a seat by the wall. And Jonathan arose, and Abner sat by Saul's side, and David's place was empty. Nevertheless, Saul spake not anything that day, for he thought, something hath befallen him. He is not clean. Surely he's not clean. Ceremonially speaking, something's going on. He's encountered something or been involved with something that would cause him to not be ceremonially clean at this time. And it came to pass, verse 27, on the morrow, day 2, which was the 2nd day of the month, that David's place was empty. And Saul said unto Jonathan his son, Wherefore cometh not the son of Jesse to meat, neither yesterday nor today? And Jonathan answered Saul, David earnestly asked me leave to go to Bethlehem. And he said, Let me go, I pray thee, for our family hath a sacrifice in the city, and my brother, he hath commanded me to be there. And now, if I have found favor in thine eyes, let me get away, I pray thee, and see my brethren. Therefore he cometh not unto the king's table. Then Saul's anger was kindled against Jonathan, and he said unto him, Thou son of the perverse, rebellious woman, do not I know that thou hast chosen the son of Jesse to thine own confusion, and unto the confusion of thy mother's nakedness? For as long as the son of Jesse liveth upon the ground, thou shalt not be established, nor thy kingdom. Wherefore now send and fetch him unto me, for he shall surely die. And Jonathan answered Saul his father, and said unto him, Wherefore shall he be slain? What hath he done? And Saul cast a javelin at him to smite him, whereby Jonathan knew that it was determined to his father, or of his father, to slay David. So Jonathan arose from the table in fierce anger, and did eat no meat the 2nd day of the month, for he was grieved for David, because his father had done him shame. And it came to pass in the morning, Jonathan went out to the field at the time appointed, with David, and a little lad with him. And he said unto his lad, Run, find out now the arrows which I shoot. And as the lad ran, he shot an arrow beyond him. And when the lad was come to the place of the arrow which Jonathan had shot, Jonathan cried after the lad, and said, Is not the arrow beyond thee? And Jonathan cried after the lad, Make speed and haste, stay not. And Jonathan's lad gathered up the arrows and came to his master. But the lad knew not anything. Only Jonathan and David knew the matter. And Jonathan gave his artillery, his weapons, unto his lad, and said unto him, Go, carry them to the city. And as soon as the lad was gone, David arose out of the place toward the south, fell on his face to the ground, and bowed himself 3 times. And they kissed one another, and wept one with another, until David exceeded, or basically David wept more. And Jonathan said to David, Go in peace, for as much as we have sworn both of us in the name of the Lord, saying, The Lord be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever. And he arose and departed, and Jonathan went into the city. They're only going to see each other one more time after this, and it will be brief. But they're best friends, blood brothers, in covenant with one another. Now, Saul, he notices David's not at the table, thinks he's unclean. He waits the next day. David's still not there. He asks Jonathan what's going on. Jonathan gives him the reason that David and him had talked about, and Saul gets really angry, and he talks bad about Jonathan and Jonathan's mama, okay? He brings Jonathan's mama into the situation. Now, you don't do that, right? When you cross the mama line, even today, that's fighting words, right? But Saul did it. He talked down and talked bad, insulted his mother. And he says, look, don't you get it? You're doing this to your own harm, to your own detriment. You've done this. And as long as David is alive, you are not going to get established, nor is your kingdom. But what did God already tell Saul? He has no hope for establishing a dynasty in Israel. His disobedience cut his house off. His disobedience caused him and his person to be rejected. Saul thinks he can still get his own house established in Israel. Saul thinks he can thwart the plans of God. Don't you get it? If we kill David, then we've got the place. This is all ours. Jonathan says, why in the world should he die? So now we've got a father and son fight. They're arguing. Saul gets angry, picks up his spear, his javelin, he slings it at his son, intending to kill him. And then Jonathan gets it. Dad really does want David dead. He tried to kill me. No, he was already getting it. But Saul tries to kill his own boy, who he just said he wanted to have established as the next king. Well, that's definitely going to keep that from happening if you kill him. But Saul is so rash, and he is so driven by his own ambition and own emotion and own perspective and own everything that he acts in such a manner. And it infuriates Jonathan. He gets up and he goes. He doesn't eat. His heart's broken. And he knows that he's got to go and tell David the truth. And he does. He does exactly what he told David he would do. And whenever the boy comes back after getting the arrows, he gives him his weapons. He says, all right, now get out of here. And the two of them embrace. When you're saying bye to somebody, and you know it might be the very last time that you see them, face to face, alive, that's a pretty big moment. There's a lot of people that wishes they had known that the last time they seen somebody was going to be the last time that they seen somebody. And so the emotion between David and Jonathan in this moment is completely understandable because they know the gravity of the situation. David can't come around. See, David is committed to do the right thing as well. And David is not going to raise his hand against Saul. He's going to refuse to do so, right? We're going to see that later. But he's already evidenced he doesn't want to kill the guy. Whenever Saul tries to get him with a javelin in times previous, when he tries to kill him with his spear, David runs. David hides. David, a commander, over 1,000. David, who had been praised by the people of the cities. Saul has killed thousands, but David has killed 10,000s. David, who found success in every battle he had engaged in on behalf of Saul, refuses to lift his hand already. Jonathan knows David's going to leave and get out. David knows he's putting Jonathan at risk as well. I think they understand that depth. And so they do embrace, and they hold on, and David weeps. His heart is broken. I don't know that David had anybody as close to him to this point as Jonathan. I don't think he had, even amongst his own brothers. Remember whenever he went to go fight Goliath, the three oldest ones were there, and one of them gave him a pretty hard time about even being and taking interest in the fight. Jonathan was the one who took off his weapons and took off some royal garb, his outer robe, and gave him that garment, and gave him his sword. Jonathan had been the one who was always there. So these two are very close. Saul is very angry. He's upset about his son. He feels betrayed. He feels like his son's making really horrible choices, but in reality, Jonathan is making the absolute best choice he can make. He's doing the right thing. Maybe there's questions or comments over that section. Okay. If not, as a final note, remember what Jonathan exhorts David with. David's weeping, he's really upset. And Jonathan said to him, this is verse 42, "Go in peace, for as much as we've sworn between both us in the name of the Lord," that's Yahweh, covenant name of God, saying, "The Lord, Yahweh, be between me and thee, and between my seed and thy seed forever." And so Jonathan continued to encourage David and to remind David that God is in the middle of all of this. Between me and you, God's right there in the middle. That was the foundation of all of this. God. Not any God. Not a God of the Philistines. Not a God of the Edomites. Not a God of anybody else. Yahweh, the one true God, the covenant God of Israel, who would deliver them out of the hands of the Egyptians. That was the God that was between them. When that's the foundation of our relationships, that can carry us through a whole lot. David had a whole lot of reasons not to trust Jonathan. And Jonathan had a whole lot of reasons not to trust David. But love trusts all things. We'll roll to the next slide. We'll start into chapter 21. David goes on the run. So chapter 21, verse 1. Then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid of the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, and hath said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee. And I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread of the young men, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women. And David answered the priest and said unto him, Of a truth, women have been kept from us about these 3 days since I came out, and the vessels of the young men are holy; they've been set apart. And the bread, and the bread is in a manner common, yea, though it were sanctified this day in the vessel. So the priest gave him hallowed bread, for there was no bread there but the showbread that was taken out or taken from the Lord to put hot bread in the day when it was taken away. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. And David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not here under thine hand a spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. And the priest said, The sword of Goliath, the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. For if thou wilt take that, take it. for there is none other save that here. And David said, there is none like that, give it to me. And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish, the king of Gath. Sorry. Pause there. You can roll to the next slide. All right, so David goes to a city called Nob. Nob is, assume this is where the tabernacle has now been set up. It still does not have the Ark of the Covenant, though. The priests are dwelling there. That's why the assumption the tabernacle has probably been established. They have the ephod. There's articles of worship, but the ark has not come back yet. We looked at that a long time ago. And so David goes there to the high priest. He encounters him, and the guy's a little concerned, all right? And rightfully so. A guy in David's position, with his prestige and the circles he ran in, he should have had people with him. And it's really kind of weird when somebody shows up in a way that they don't normally show up. People notice that, right? And it bothered the priest, like, whoa, what's going on? Why are you by yourself? Why isn't there anyone here with you? Something's not right. He got that. And something wasn't right. And so David decides to conceal himself, if you will. He's like, look, Saul has put me on top secret mission, okay? And it is important. I can't talk about it. All I can tell you is that I had to go quick. And so I am on my way. I have already established a place for my men to meet me. That's what he's getting about, the servants coming to such and such a place at the end of verse 2. He's like, I have a rendezvous set up with my men. He says, now, I need something to eat. Give me some bread. What have you got? I need at least 5 loaves. Give me at least 5 loaves of bread, but whatever you got, I'll take. And the priest looks at him and says, we ain't got nothing here. Now that's a concern, because the people of Israel should have been bringing a tithe and leaving it with the priest. And they would have been able to use the food for themselves and for ministry. But he says we don't have anything except for the showbread, which is the bread or bread of presence, if you will. Inside of the tabernacle, you had a table, right? And it's you had the altar of incense, you had the menorah, the lampstand, you had the table of presence where the bread would be placed and other utensils that were utilized. But you had 12 loaves of bread, and every Sabbath those were supposed to be replaced. So they'd bake new bread, and they would replace it with fresh. And then that bread, the showbread, was only supposed to be eaten by the priests in the holy place. Okay, that was who it was reserved for and where it was reserved for. David says, I need something to eat. And Ahimelech's like, look, all I got's the showbread. So if you and your boys have kept yourselves ceremonially clean, I'll give that to you. And David says, look, my guys are always clean. Whenever we go on a mission, we're already dedicated. All right, we take the time to be clean before God because because here's the thing, David understood something. When he goes out in battles, when he goes out to fight, he's going out to fight the Lord's battles, right? He's not going to be a guy that engages willy-nilly in battle. There was a whole process that you went through. Anyways, he's like, we're clean for that. And basically, how much more so in this situation? And so Ahimelech gives him that bread. Says, there you go. You can eat it. He seems to understand something. That bread represents the provision of God. It represents even God's presence among his people. These are things that would be given to a king, right? Provisions would be provided. And the tabernacle represents God's dwelling place among his people. And so having these articles such as bread would serve as elements that would be normal in a king's presence, offered by his servants, offered by his people. And so it was unto the Lord. They knew God wasn't taking them and eating them. He'd already told them, you're going to replace these every Sabbath. But it's what it stood for. And it also served to remind that God's the one who provides these, who gives to us. So Ahimelech looks at this, it seems as though he looks at this bread and he says, it's all I've got. God's the one who gives. God's the one who provides. God's among his people, and this is God's servant who's supposed to be going out and battling. So he seems to get maybe more at the heart of the law, because Jesus is going to make mention of this later and appeal to how David wasn't supposed to eat the bread, but he ate the bread regardless. Later on, whenever Jesus is dealing with some Pharisees on some issues. He seems to get to the heart of it, and he gives him the supplies he needs. He gives him the bread. So David takes it. David's going to eat it. And while David is there, it's mentioned that Doeg the Edomite is present as well. And he is the top man among Saul's herdsmen, his shepherds. Okay? He's the chief shepherd. And he's detained there before the Lord. Why he's detained there, don't really know. It could be, some theorize. We don't know, the scripture doesn't tell us, so it's a theory. That as an Edomite, he very well could be a proselyte. That is, that he's converted to Judaism. All right? Edomites are the descendants of Esau. All right? Jacob, Esau, Israel, Edom. And Doeg may be there as a proselyte. Maybe he's become unclean. He's going through a cleansing. Maybe, or maybe he has some commitment that he's made. Don't know exactly, but he's there. And his presence would seem to introduce, one commentator noted that it very well could introduce an aspect of villainy. Okay, because Edom doesn't necessarily support Israel. You can see that whenever Israel requests. Moses sends word over, and I've made a reference. Yes, it's in there, Numbers 20. Moses requests safe passage through the land of Edom. He's like, look, we'll stay on the road. We're not going to go off on nobody's property. We're not going to take anything. We're not going to get anything. We just want to go through here. And they show up in force. They show up with their military force, and they say, you're not coming through our property. You're not coming through our land. This is Esau's descendants talking to Jacob's descendants. Remember, Jacob, Esau, twins. Jacob and Esau, who had actually reconciled with one another. But now their families, their descendants, are not going together. And the Edomites stood in opposition. In fact, they will, later on, they'll be even more in opposition with Israel. And so that's why the commentators make note of that element of villainy. Because what's going to happen is Doeg is going to be the guy that rats out David. When Saul's mad and wants to know, why is anybody telling about David? Where is David? I need David. It's Doeg that says, I seen David. He was over at Nob. He went and did this. He went and he got some bread from the priest. He took Goliath's sword. I seen him do it. I was there. And Saul's going to muster up some men, and he's going to go to Nob, and he's going to kill all the priests. Except for one. And that guy's going to go on the run and go to David. We're not there yet, but we're getting there. So yes, the reason I want to point that out is because Scripture is fascinating. When names and places like that are mentioned, it very well could be that they're trying to tell us more about the story. A little bit of foreshadowing, right? You ever read a book and you saw something, you're like, I wonder why that detail's there. And then like 3 chapters later, you're like, oh, that's why it was there. And you're like, this guy's a genius. I used to love that with the Hardy Boy books. Y'all ever read them? I have a stack of them bad boys. They're really not bad boys. They're the Hardy Boys. They're like clean cut, always do the right thing, whatever. But, sleuths. And some of y'all just remember the TV show from the 80s. But I always appreciated that in literature. God is a really good author. And he gives us information like that. So that whenever we're like, Doeg the Edomite, why are we telling him it's an Edomite? Who are the Edomites? Where do they come from? We get a little bit more background. Oh, well, that's a descendant of Esau. So wait a second. This guy's going to stand up against Jacob or against David. So maybe not only is he giving us a little bit of this, hey, there's some background here, these guys have been clashing, they're fighting, but it's also this kind of continuation of this Jacob-Esau dynamic in the early part of their, or when they were younger men, if you will, being at odds with one another. It's fascinating. Kind of goes back to what we were talking about whenever you have the Agag that Saul was supposed to kill, and he doesn't. And then later on in Esther, it's noted that hateful Haman is an Agagite. It would seem that the writers were inspired to kind of paint a certain picture for us. So those kinds of things are fascinating, and I like to point them out. Maybe there's questions or comments about that section. No? Okay, you can roll to the next slide. This is the 10 through 15. We should be able to finish chapter 21. And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish the king of Gath. I did that twice tonight. And the servants of Achish said unto him, Is not this David, the king of the land? Did they not sing one to another of him in dances, saying, Saul hath slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And David laid up these words in his heart, and was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. And he changed his behavior before them, and feigned himself mad in their hands, and scrabbled on the doors of the gate, and let his spittle fall down upon his beard. And then said Achish unto his servants, Lo, ye see the man is mad. Wherefore then have ye brought him to me? Have I need of madmen, that you brought this fellow to play the madman in my presence? Shall this fellow come into my house? So David, it would seem, now this is really weird. Let me back up just a second. David goes to Gath. Who else was from Gath? Goliath. Goliath's from Gath. David goes to the hometown of the dude whose head he cut off after he knocked him out, got him down, killed him with that sling and a stone. He killed the giant Goliath, and he went to his place. Now, why exactly David decides he ought to go to Gath, don't know. There's some things that kind of puzzle us about how David behaves, right? Why does he conceal himself to the priest? Why doesn't he tell him the truth? I'm going to be honest with you. You know, Saul's wanting me dead. I've gone on the run. That's what's wrong. That's why I'm by myself. I just need some food. Can you give me some food? Can you give me a weapon? Will you? David needed help, and he was desperate. But decided to kill himself. Maybe in an effort to keep the priest, Ahimelech, out of trouble. If Saul came around asking questions, he'd have plausible deniability. Well, I seen David, sure, but he told me that you sent him on a mission, and it was really secret and hush-hush, and he had to be in a hurry, and he just asked for some food, and he asked for a sword. Now, Saul doesn't show up asking questions. Saul shows up. Man, that's too much for my mouth. Saul shows up and just starts killing people. He's in a rage. And so, I don't know exactly what the end game was. It does backfire in concealing himself. Why does he go to Gath? Maybe it's the concept of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Maybe I can find refuge here because I'm going to be an enemy of Saul, or I'm an enemy of Saul. They're an enemy of Saul, so maybe they'll be willing to accept me in their presence. But if I stay in Israel, maybe I'll find rejection because of those people that are loyal to Saul. So it's possible. It doesn't explain it. It just says he goes there. And it seems as though he requests a presence he requests to enter into Achish's presence because his men bring him before the king. But then while he's there, he's recognized. Isn't this the king? That's fascinating. That the Philistines look at David and say, ain't this the king? Isn't this the guy that they were singing praise about because the thousands that he's killed? Saul killed thousands. David killed tens of thousands. David gets worried. These guys know who I am. If they know, if they're looking at me like I'm the king, I'm actually maybe an enemy of theirs now. Maybe they want to kill me. Maybe they want me dead. What do I do? And so in desperation, he acts crazy. He starts acting crazy, and Achish looks at him, and he's a lone ranger at this point. He's all by himself, which if he is who his servants say that he is, he really shouldn't be, and now he's acting crazy. He's like, you know what? I don't need another crazy guy around here. I've got enough. Y'all, why are y'all bringing him to me? Get rid of this guy. And it works. David gets out of there. David escapes. I think it is a little odd. He puts on a ruse. He's practicing deceit. Don't know exactly why. But I would say he's desperate. He's hurt. He's alone. And he's making decisions. He's doing what he does. Now, God still protects him. Ultimately, God is the one who still takes care of David. When all the priests of Nob are slaughtered, except the one, David isn't caught. Even if somebody pleading for their life says, well, he went that way, Saul isn't able to catch him if Saul pursued him. Achish says, just get rid of the guy. I don't need him. He's crazy. And this isn't going to be the only time that he ends up in Achish's place. He's going to show up later, but he's going to show up later with about probably at least 1,000 people around him when David comes back to Achish. And he's going to be acting completely sane. We'll talk about that later, whenever we get to that point. But David will seek he will seek asylum, if you will, in Gath again. Are there questions or comments about that chapter? We was able to get through that one quick. All right. Well, if not, then we'll pray and be dismissed. Heavenly Father, we come to you tonight, and God, we're thankful for everything that you do for us and the way that you lead us through, and God, the way that you preserve your servant. God, I pray that we will learn to trust in you, that we will learn to seek you, and that we will completely rely on you. And God, I hope and pray that we understand that we can't thwart your plans, and rather, God, we would seek to be faithful and obedient to them, and that we would keep you in the middle of all of our relationships.